And we're seeing that there's so many generations that don't have they're hiding behind the technology, and they're falling away from the interpersonal communications aspect that's needed to sell and to create relationships. Do you have any advice on that from a sales training perspective, or any job that is human to human?
Well, first of all, everyone is in sales, and you've probably, with a sales training background,
Right.
You probably say that all the time. And I think that sales is actually more important than ever, because so many people are becoming contract workers and will have to not just sell themselves for a job once every couple of years, but will need to sell themselves throughout the course of their professional lives every couple of months, or even more frequently than that. So it's not even just having sales skills from the perspective of being able to sell your company or your products, or everyone is going to need to focus more on how to sell themselves. And of course, this is all relationship based, about ascertaining what somebody else needs and having a genuine rapport with them, and being able to talk with them and figure out, okay, well, where can we come to an agreement about how I can help you and you can help me? And it sounds really basic, but in fact, a lot of people aren't good at this.
Welcome to the Pivotal Leader Podcast with Gina Trimarco, featuring lively interviews with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their stories and best practices for shifting business from problems to profits. Sit back and get ready to pivot.
Hey everyone, this is Gina Trimarco, Chief Results Officer of Pivot Time Results, a strategy and training company that helps businesses shift from people problems to performance results. Each week on The Pivotal Leader, I feature inspirational leaders who know how to positively impact their customers, employees, and brand through culture building. On this episode of The Pivotal Leader, I interviewed Alexandra Levit, Managing Partner at PeopleResults and workplace consultant, author, and speaker. She consults and writes on leadership development, human resources, entrepreneurship, career and workplace trends on behalf of numerous Fortune 500 companies, including American Express, Canon, Deloitte, DeVry University, Intuit, Silk Road, and Staples, and has spoken on these topics at hundreds of organizations around the world, including Abbott, Aetna, Bank of America, Cardinal Health, Campbell Soup, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Human Capital Institute, McDonald's, Microsoft, PepsiCo, the Society of Human Resource Management, and Whirlpool. A former nationally syndicated columnist for the Wall Street Journal and writer for the New York Times, Fast Company, and Forbes, Alexandra has authored several books, including the international bestseller, They Don't Teach Corporate in College, and in her newest book, Humanity Works, Merging Technologies and People for the Workforce of the Future, she provides a vision of a future where people are free to work wherever and for whomever they choose. Machines perform multiple tasks, and virtual teams come together and disband at lightning speed. From explaining demographic shifts in the workplace, to tracing the rise of the gig economy and virtual teams, to exploring how workers will interact with technology, the book is a call to action for maximizing human potential. Backed by academic research and Levit's own experience working with Fortune 500 companies, Humanity Works chronicles the evolving role of the human amid smart machines, identifying skills and traits that won't be replaced by robots, and suggested ways for leaders to encourage employees to develop and hone their abilities. While machines can automate many tasks, humans will still be valued for their abstract reasoning and creative problem-solving abilities. Each chapter includes case studies that illustrate how key concepts are implemented in a real-world business environment and on an action plan to put the concepts to work. Humanity Works provides current and aspiring C-level executives with much-needed insight into how to future-proof their organizations. So let's listen in and learn from Alexandra. Hello, Alexandra. Welcome to The Pivotal Leader.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Congratulations on your new book, Humanity Works. I'm excited to talk about that today.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk about it too.
I see that you're going on like this, or you're in the middle of a tour, a 5-city tour. Tell us more about that, just because I'm excited for you.
Yeah, so this is unlike any other book that I've launched before, in that it is being published in the UK first by a London-based publisher named Kogan Page. And so there are actually 2 launch dates. The European and Asian launch date actually happened 2 days ago on, I don't know when this is airing, but it was on October 3rd. And then in North America, the book is launching on October 28th. So because of that, we have a little bit of a rolling launch situation. And I'm going to start by kicking off actually here in the U.S., Chicago, New York, and Dallas. And then I'm going to go overseas to India to launch it there. And we'll then come back to the U.S. and do Boston and San Francisco. So I'm really excited to meet people, to hear what their thoughts are. the challenge with this book, of course, is there are a lot of ideas and, of course, research and theoretical concepts, but I want to know how companies are implementing this or how they plan to. So I'm hoping to have a lot of good conversations to that effect.
Well, that's exciting. And we're definitely going to be talking about the book. There's so much that we can talk about. I know that you've done a lot of research, and obviously that goes into the book. And you've specifically done proprietary research in these 4 areas on the future of work, the millennial generation, which is always a hot topic. It's funny, I get people who say, can you teach me how to like my millennials, which is just a ridiculous request. Number 3, gender differences and bias, also very hot right now. I could tell you a quick story about that with a restaurant I went to recently that there was a sign outside the door that said, come in for our hot waitresses. And that just sent me into an Instagram tizzy.
Oh my.
Yeah. I'm like, is this a joke? And
it wasn't Hooters.
And it wasn't Hooters. No. No, that I could accept, but this was like, I had to like do a double take a picture, put it on Instagram. And then number 4, the skills gap. Could you share some of your findings that could help leaders lead better in their organizations? Maybe like one key item from those 4 areas. I know that's a pretty lofty question.
No problem. Certainly. Well, one of the more interesting studies I've done the last couple of years was actually done in conjunction with Deloitte, which is, as most people listening probably know, a very large consulting firm that is global. And we wanted to look specifically at millennials as leaders because, as you mentioned, people talk about how do I get along with my millennials? And the fact of the matter is that that's a moot question at this point. The oldest millennials are 38 years old, and half of them are leading companies. So the question becomes is how can we better prepare them to lead companies, not how can we get along with them?
Yeah.
And we wanted to look at that from a global perspective. So we surveyed a lot of global millennials. It was somewhere around 100,000, and looked at what they were saying specifically they needed in order to be able to manage effectively, drive companies forward, and impact the bottom line. And we learned that they do have some different needs because they did come of age at a different time when the business world was changing. They are entering leadership at a time when technology is really impacting operations. And of course, all the things we talk about, humanity works, all the trends are happening, and they lead differently. They're very much transformational leaders as opposed to command and control style leaders. And they need different development as a result of that. So we went out and we asked from a global perspective, okay, millennials, what are you saying that you need? And we learned it's very much mentorship based, very much experiential learning, where you are actually learning key concepts of management on the job as opposed to being taught them in a classroom. And it just really was rather eye-opening with respect to what we need to do to train these folks. And unfortunately, what most organizations are doing now is they're just thrusting them into leadership and setting them up to fail, because millennials did enter leadership positions at a younger age while their careers were stalled due to the recession. So what that means is that they spent fewer years at the entry level, in the mid-level, or as individual contributors, and were thrust into leadership very suddenly, which is not a good combination. And then you add to that they have a lot of the stressors of having aging grandparents and parents. Most of them are becoming parents themselves. They're getting married. They want to have hobbies. They want to have work-life balance. And this is all very hard to do when you're trying to run a company. So it's a lot of stress. And they are in a position in their lives right now when they need a lot of assistance and a lot of support. And companies are not even really thinking that way. So that was one major finding of the research in the last couple of years that I think is important to get out, which is that we need to be focusing on millennials as leaders, not as the entry-level folks, because we've got a new generation in town that are the entry-level folks, and they're called Generation Z, and they're also different. But if we really want to be proactive, those are the folks we should be figuring out how to get along with and integrate into the workforce.
Well, do you have any thoughts on Generation Z? I mean, it's a really good point that Generation X is where they are, and I think a lot of us are pretty clear on everything that you've talked about, what needs to happen. But what about Generation Z?
Generation Z is an interesting group. They're a lot smaller than the millennials because they were born, a lot of them, during the recession, which is when people were having fewer children. The years around them vary depending on who you ask, but most people say that the generation starts around 1996, ends around 2012. So essentially you have the oldest one just graduated from university this past May, in June, 2018, and they have entered the workforce. So we've seen for the first time interns, entry-level professionals that are in this generation. And the hallmark of this generation is really curiosity, and it's the fact that they're self-starters. This is a group where if they wanted to learn something growing up, they didn't ask their parents or teachers. They asked Siri or Google. And they practiced what's known as hack schooling, which is if something was of interest to them, they would go out and find out about it. And they could, because they were the first generation to be raised solely on the internet. The millennials actually were children when the internet was not pervasive. So Gen Z is the group where they know how to get anything that they want, and they have a mouthpiece. One of the most fascinating things I've seen lately is so many Gen Z are starting their own companies before they're even out of high school, because they can crowdfund to get started, because they can promote themselves on Instagram. And so you see where kids in the past might have had a dream, and maybe they brought it to fruition through a lemonade stand. Now you see real live entrepreneurs, and it's fascinating. But of course, this generation, like all generations, not perfect. And they've got some attention span issues. They've got some interpersonal communication issues, because if you think about how fast they switch from one thing to another, they're not used to having prolonged focus on any one thing. And they also, of course, have issues where, they're not used to talking to people in person or solving conflicts in person, because everything is done via text or instant messaging. And there's one thing, of course, I have to point out whenever I talk about generational differences. Of course, these differences are research-based. They are grounded in reality. It's not something that I made up. But at the same time, we do have to remember everybody's an individual. And so I know that, in particular, leaders are fatiguing around the topic of millennials, where like, God, I'm so sick of stereotyping the millennials. And it's true, you shouldn't stereotype anyone. You should take everyone as an individual person who has different things to add. But that said, there is a lot of research around this stuff that shows that there are generational trends, and they're shaped by society and what's going on at the time. So people who came of age around 9/11 are going to have certain common factors that influence them. And the way of parenting that was done when kids were growing up is also going to have an influence. So the millennials were raised differently than Gen Z was being raised. And as a result, we see some of the differences.
And just like how Gen X was raised too. I've come through as Gen X, and I had two parents from two different generations. So that impact is completely different when you're raised by a boomer and
traditionalist.
Yeah. So when you have because my dad was so much older than my mother, the influence of those generations, or the influence of your parental generations on you, also shape you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I love the fact that you mentioned Gen X. I'm an X or two, a later one, but we were raised to be self-reliant and to take care of ourselves. And I mean, really the last generation to be like that. And I think that we're also a small generation like Z that is bookended between the huge millennial generation and the huge boomer generation.
Yeah.
And we've really made our own way. And I still think we're coming into our own, to be honest. I don't think we've seen the last of Gen X at all.
I agree. I feel like I'm just getting in my prime.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk a little bit about, because this is so hot right now, about gender differences and gender bias, some of the research that has come up for you on that, and maybe some strategies around that, because it's become such a touchy topic. Would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially given today's political climate and the issues around Me Too, I think that everyone is pretty sensitive now in the workforce around gender bias, and we've realized that it is a true and real thing. And I think where we need to be careful is in assuming that everything is happening due to gender bias or gender differences. I think that there is responsibility to be borne on both sides when we talk about conflicts that are happening. I've, of course, observed quite a lot of unconscious bias, which is an automatic attitude that you form about somebody based on gender, for example, that you're not really aware that you have. That's, of course, what unconscious means. And you're not doing it on purpose, but you just have an automatic attitude about someone because they might be a woman. So unconscious bias is a real thing, but there are things that, I talk to women all the time, to women's leadership groups. There are things that women can be doing to sort of combat this occasional negative perception that women are too emotional, or women don't assert themselves. And that's that we go out there and we communicate clearly, and we say what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And we overall just practice what is known as assertive communication, or expressing your views while respecting those of others. And also standing up for your own accomplishments and not letting yourself get thrown under the bus a man tries to take over your role in a meeting, which I hear happens all the time, tries to talk over you, don't let that happen. Stand up for yourself. And so there's two things at play here. We have to be careful about saying, well, unconscious bias and gender bias, it just is, and the men need to stop doing it. I mean, there are things that the women can do too to sort of prevent a lot of the negative effects of that. But of course, everybody needs to be aware. The first step in fighting this is for everyone to just know that it exists and to realize when it can come into play, and to put, I think, objective measures into evaluating people and making decisions whenever possible to keep that unconscious bias from creeping into things like recruiting and onboarding and performance evaluations, even learning. There are areas all the time where it creeps in. And so we just have to make sure that we are checking that at every turn.
You mentioned that there are some things that women can do as well. Can you give us one example of something that women can do that they could be more proactive with it?
Well, negotiation is a huge thing. And the research shows that women just do not negotiate the way men do. They're just more likely to take a first offer. Also, women won't apply for a job unless they feel like they meet 9 out of the 10 criteria, whereas men will look at it and say, oh, I'm eyeballing this. I meet a couple of criteria. Sure, I'll go for it anyway. And that keeps women from getting ahead. And these are active things that the woman is doing, not saying, hey, I'm going to try and see if I can get $20,000 more. What can be the harm? They think, oh, the person will look badly on me if I do that. And then they end up permanently being $20,000 in salary behind the man. And it compounds every time a man negotiates up and the woman doesn't. So that's something that we all need to work on. Women tend to be more conflict avoidant, more accepting of the status quo. And we need to stand up for ourselves and realize our worth. So, those are a couple of, I think, kind of basic things that I can share. And of course, assertive communication, making sure that you're not letting someone talk over you in a meeting, that you do have a strong voice, that you are taking credit for your own ideas. This is really, really important. And so I think we, as women, and I'm the same way, I always say, I have to take ownership of my own success. It's unfortunate that I'm, going to be prejudiced or discriminated against sometimes because I'm a woman, but I just got to take steps to overcome that. I love to tell the story about how I went to a gender bias seminar at Northwestern University once. And the whole thing was about how women in the corporate world can't get to the level that men can, just because of all the bias that exists. So I went up to the instructor afterward and I said, so let me ask you this. You say that, a woman can't get ahead as much as a man. Like, what about a short woman? Because I'm actually only 5 feet tall and I do a lot of professional speaking. So I was curious as to whether being short had an added impact. And she said, well, let me ask you a question. Do you consider yourself to be successful? I said, yeah, I think I've done all right. I'm pretty happy with the way things are. She's like, well, then you should be very proud of yourself because that's a double whammy. It's being a woman is whammy number 1 and being short is whammy number 2. And so, these are things that I can't control, right?
Right.
Can't control being a woman, can't control being short, can't control the initial perception that people are going to have of me. What I can do is be as confident as I have the potential to be. And so does that mean that sometimes I might need to prepare more or know more or be smarter than the guy? Yeah, probably. Mm-hmm. Is that fair? Not really. But this is life. Life is
That's reality.
That's reality. And so instead of saying, oh, there's nothing we can do, there is. And of course, I'm not talking about anything like sexual harassment or, I'm not going to go there, but right. That's an area where you don't put up with it and you don't try to make yourself better to fix the problem.
Right.
But, as long as we're clear on that's not what I'm referring to.
Right.
But when it comes to things like, being perceived in a certain way at work, well, there are things that you can do.
I really like that you've hit on the negotiation piece, especially because this has always been my perspective as well, that women often don't ask for what they're worth, or why not ask for more than what you're worth? That's what I usually do because it's called negotiation, and
right.
And people are going to negotiate.
That's not the final offer, right?
Right, and it's always interesting to me that women are kind of timid about it. Not all women, but some, about standing in their value and being assertive about it. So it's great to hear hear your perspective, that you echo my perspective on asking for what you're worth and not worrying about it. And then when it comes to assertive communication, this comes up a lot. I'm sure you've heard this. Some women are concerned with being too assertive where they're called the B word, frankly, right? Like, oh, so a man's assertive, a woman is the B word. And I think when you talk about there are things that women can do. To me, one of those things is I'm like, I can't worry about that is their perception of me, because they don't know how else to see me as assertive as a woman. So that's what they're going to call me. And that's fine, because I still need to push through and not worry about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And I think that especially in today's climate, we don't see this quite as much, unless, I do see certain strategies that women use that are a little bit more aggressive, and men do too, and both genders do it. So what you do have to be concerned about, I think, is erring where you've moved from assertive communication to aggressive communication. And, guys can be jerks and women can be the B word. Like, it's the same thing.
Right.
So, but being assertive, though, is being respectful of other people while standing up for yourself. So as long as you communicate in a respectful way where you make a point clear, but you're not offending someone or putting someone down, then you have nothing to be ashamed about or worry about. And there is going to be the rare person. I think it's less now than it was 10 to 15 years ago, but there is going to be the rare person who's, she stood up for herself, she's a woman. And you're absolutely right. You can't worry about that. And you just have to be comfortable in your own skin. And I think female leaders, that's been a challenge for me. And I think it's a challenge for a lot of people.
I love that definition of assertive. I'm going to definitely pull that out into our show notes, because it's a great definition of the difference between assertive and aggressive. And it really comes down to having respect for other people. And while you may appear firm, as long as you're being respectful, that's the best you can do. And like I said earlier, don't worry about it.
Yeah, showing that you care about other people, I think, is a hallmark of that transformational leadership that I mentioned earlier. It's just that you really are doing something because you want to see them succeed, as opposed to you're doing something to put them down or to put them in their place.
Yeah.
Both men and women can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to shift to, I was watching your TEDx talk at Northwestern, and you talk about the 3 C's of future work. If we could just kind of quickly go through. So the 3 C's being collaboration, customization, and creativity. Could you touch on each of those and how that's going to impact the future of work?
Sure. Well, the collaboration piece is probably the most important, because that's the way that work is changing the most. We see the rise of virtual teams where people are working with individuals that they may never meet in person. We see the rise of short-term teams where a group of people might be assembled to solve a very specific business problem and then disbanded once that problem has been addressed. So you have to form ties with people much more quickly, because you might not have the opportunity to develop a relationship over weeks or months or even years. There's also the rise of human-machine hybrid teams, where we're going to have to figure out what role should machines play on our teams. And we see the very start of that with the integration of chatbots onto teams, where you have algorithms deciding to do certain tasks and helping out with certain tasks like scheduling meetings or chasing people down for deliverables. And the machines are going to only get more sophisticated. So we'll have to figure out how to integrate them and what the role that human beings play in designing them, building them, overseeing them, and redeploying them, and of course fixing them when they break. So that's collaboration. And then customization refers to the fact that there will be no such thing in the future world of work of being able to look at your boss and say, okay, well, that's just my exact career path. You're going to be able to really do anything you want, move cross-functionally within an organization, move back and forth between doing your own gig or being a contract worker and working full-time for an organization. And so it's really going to be important for leaders to talk to people on a one-on-one basis about what skills they want to acquire and how they want their career to map from one year to the next. And there's going to be no defined path that people are going to go on. So I think that's more complex for leaders, but also presents a large opportunity. And then finally, creativity refers to one of the major skills that will set humans apart from machines in the world of work to come. And this is because we have a lot of unique business challenges that are happening as a result of all of these changes that require humans to sit down and solve. I mean, there are things that machines can do, but they're not going to know, for example, the right software program that will motivate humans to do their best in a time when the company is being downsized and people are being laid off and morale is really low. Until machines develop consciousness, this is going to be very hard for them to contribute. We need human beings to really put their creativity and also other skills like empathy, judgment, problem solving to the forefront in order to be able to add value to organizations and not just be automatically replaced because they do a task that can now be done by a machine.
I love the work of empathy because I think it's so important, and creativity, obviously, because we have an improv-based training company where we focus on creativity and empathy and critical thinking. What would be some suggestions or strategies that you could give leaders on how to really develop this piece, this creativity piece with their employees?
I think that realizing that you can do it is one of the best places to start. And there are so many creativity exercises, from just giving people a bunch of circles and seeing like, okay, well, how many different pictures can you make in these circles? And you see people putting an individual picture in each circle. You see people using 4 circles to make one picture, and it really gets your creative juices flowing. So realizing that you should and can do these things is one of the best ways to go. And instead of saying, well, we have our creatives and then we have everyone else. Creativity is a skill that can be honed in everyone and should be. So that's the first thing. And I think really just encouraging people to practice what is known as entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial strategies within the context of a larger organization. And so giving people time to tinker with solutions or products that might help drive the business forward and may not be part of their everyday responsibilities, but let them participate on committees, have them come up with new ideas. And that helps you exercise your creative muscle, but also gets ideas in from places within the organization where they might not ordinarily come from. Sometimes those are the best ideas. The worst thing that we can do is leave the creative work to, as I said, the creatives, leave the decisions to the C-suite. We want to be getting input from people at all levels in all functions, and appreciating people for the unique perspectives that they might bring based on their combination of expertise and background. And that's something I think that most companies could probably be doing better. And it does fly in the face of that traditional hierarchical type of organization, but I think that's probably where we're moving anyway. So leaders who try to implement this, I think will see that it's received positively.
I think the best thing you said was realizing you can do it. Of all of that. And I think that is really truly where it begins, because there are so many people who are in the mindset of creatives are creatives and I'm not creative. And you hear people say it all the time. Yeah,
exactly. It's unfortunate because we all are going to need that skill. And that's the thing. People say to me, it's the funniest situation right now where we have this huge tech skills shortage, and you see the people who have these kind of basic technical skills resting on their laurels because they feel like they'll always be able to get a job and they'll never have any problem being marketable and competitive. The truth of the matter is a lot of tech jobs that are pretty basic in terms of programming or, information security or database management, these are going to be the first things to be automated. So if those people don't have creativity and haven't figured out how to reinvent themselves and use their tech skills to a greater end, they're going to be the ones out of a job. It's not the creative people. So it's a really interesting situation now that it's going to be sure to shift, and I think it's going to leave a lot of people very
well. I think you may have actually answered my next question, because the next thing I was going to ask you is that with more technology and automation, where should we as professionals and entrepreneurs be focusing our attention in order to be more marketable and competitive in the future?
Well, yeah, and the most important thing to do here is see the writing on the wall. And this varies depending on your industry. Every industry has a different set of automation threats, I guess, where, okay, there are certain sets of tasks that could be easily taken over by machines. And then you have to look at the next step and say, okay, well, what else is going to be needed even once this task is automated? And how can I immediately acquire the skills to be able to do that? And to look at the aspects of your job that are possible to be automated and tasks that are probably always going to remain with humans. And this is what I tell people when they start to wring their hands and catastrophize and go into a panic about all human beings losing their jobs as a result of automation, which is never going to happen. I tell them, okay, well, like look at, for example, an industry like law. So you have law and you have certain aspects of being in the legal profession, like doing legal research, like if you're a litigator appearing in front of a court, talking to a jury, talking to clients. And if you look at all the things that are likely to be automated, well, what was the first thing in the legal profession that got automated? It's the legal research angle. So that's the thing that machines can look up in a matter of, an algorithm can look up in a matter of 60 seconds, 50,000 cases and find, a relevant one that they can use to build their case. And this is something that is now we don't need paralegals for it. We don't need legal assistants for it. Lawyers don't even need to do it anymore. So that's something that's gone. But we still need lawyers. Like a robot is not anytime soon going to go into a courtroom and be able to present a case.
Gosh, I hope not.
I don't think so. I just don't think it's going to work. I mean, they don't have. So all this is has a caveat that robots are not going to develop consciousness and be able to present themselves like human beings. But we are so far from that right now. Another great example is the nursing field. If you think about what can be automated in nursing, Japan actually tried to do this. I talk about this in the TED Talk, that they developed this huge nursing robot called Robear, and it was in the shape of a giant white bear. And they originally intended Robear to do all sorts of cool stuff and really replaced a lot of human nurses. And what they found is that Robear was really only good at moving patients in and out of bed and serving them food. That when it came to other nursing tasks like being able to read in a patient's eyes the level of pain that they were in, being able to draw on previous experiences to know when you should bring in what expert, just based on having been in a situation many, many times before, being able to sit down with a bereaved family and talk to them about a grave diagnosis or even a death. These are things that nurses do every day that cannot be taken over by a robot. So, we tried to automate that in Japan. And we found, wow, we really need our human nurses. And I think most fields are going to be like that. So it's not a matter of thinking your job is going to go away. It's going to be a matter of thinking of how is your job going to change and how can you stay ahead of those changes.
I don't think anyone really thinks about that, especially those who are in non-tech type of jobs and are like, well, I'm safe. I'm not in a tech job. I'm fine. There won't be an automation. But to your point, we're still going to try to replace as many humans as possible. And when I say we, I'm talking about other companies. So I think you have to be ahead of that game. When you talk about nursing, that's already a challenge, I think, for nurses because they're processing patients so quickly. And my mom was in and out of the hospital, so I've spent a lot of time in hospitals. And they're challenged as it is with automation because the automation is actually slowing down their ability to make eye contact and have empathy. And one of my mother's biggest complaints was she used to say, the nurse is back with the robot. I mean, it was the computer on wheels, but she called it the robot. And it drove her crazy because they're just not as connected as they used to be human-wise.
Yep. And patient satisfaction and patient care goes down as a result. And we've seen that business outcomes for hospitals and healthcare organizations go down as a direct relationship with patient satisfaction and the level of care that patients feel like they receive. So it's not just about, for hospitals, it's not just about getting paid. It's about people really being happy, believe it or not.
So those human skills are going to continue to be really important. So something that our company focuses on is sales training. We do a lot of sales training with organizations, and even the face of sales is changing because customers can do all their research online, find out everything they need to know before making a decision. But one of the things that I'm constantly pushing is that while we have that technology, you still, as a human salesperson, have to close the deal. And that deal is usually closed by a human, not by a computer. And we're seeing that there's so many generations that don't have they're hiding behind the technology, and they're falling away from the interpersonal communications aspect that's needed to sell and to create relationships. Do you have any advice on that from a sales training perspective or any job that is human to human?
Well, first of all, everyone is in sales, and you've probably, with a sales training background,
Right.
you probably say that all the time. And I think that sales is actually more important than ever because so many people are becoming contract workers and will have to not just sell themselves for a job once every couple of years, but will need to sell themselves throughout the course of their professional lives every couple of months or even more frequently than that. So it's not even just having sales skills from the perspective of being able to sell your company or your products, or everyone is going to need to focus more on how to sell themselves. And of course, this is all relationship based, about ascertaining what somebody else needs and having a genuine rapport with them and being able to talk with them and figure out, okay, well, where can we come to an agreement about how I can help you and you can help me? And it sounds really basic, but in fact, a lot of people aren't good at this.
Mm-hmm.
And they think, oh, I'll just go in and say what I need. And it's kind of one of the fundamental rules. Dale Carnegie used to talk about it in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's not about going to somebody and talking about what you need. It's figuring out, okay, well, what is their goal? What are they trying to accomplish? And figuring out how your plan fits into that. And, Stephen Covey also talks about the win-win, which is making sure that you get what you need while also making sure that the other person gets what they need. And all great negotiations they end in a win-win. So I think that's probably a long-winded answer, that sales training and being able to ensure that people have these skills, that everybody has these skills, not just people that are in sales, is going to become more and more imperative.
Thank you. And I think, because I was going to ask you, what do you think, how can people, besides sales training, get better at that? My first thought is mindfulness of setting your mind for being like that. What do you think?
Yeah, just like we tell people they have to have a mindset of adaptability and we have to have a mindset of creativity, you also have to have the mindset of being able to continually reinvent yourself and put yourself out there. And to be very honest with you, this is probably my biggest concern. People always ask me, you seem so optimistic about the future of work. Where are you worried? And where I'm not worried is that there will be jobs for human beings. As I've said, I think there's plenty of jobs. Where I am worried is that just like there are people who are not great at working in traditional corporate settings and have gone out and become entrepreneurs or started their own business because it's not their preference to work in that hierarchical structure, equally, there's going to be people who are not naturally cut out for being freelance. Or contract workers, or being in a position of having to sell themselves all the time. Yes, there's going to be many more of those people thrust into the workforce by 2030. Probably by that time, half of all global employees will be contract workers in some respects, part of that gig economy. And I don't think it comes naturally to a lot of people. So being willing to have that openness to new experience and say, actually I have to be comfortable with a new way of doing things. And to realize you do need to learn it and you do need to practice it. And it might not be something that you're totally comfortable with, but you have to do it anyway. And the good news is there are ways to become more comfortable. And there's tons of courses on selling yourself and reinventing yourself. And many of them are free. I continue to like the massive open online course model where you can go to a variety of sites and sign up with a bunch of other people from around the world and do a course from your desk. And it's as easy and inexpensive as ever to get access to training on all sorts of what we call soft skills. And that's what we've been talking about. So take the burden on yourself to say, you know what, this is how things are changing. And if I don't feel comfortable with it, I need to prepare myself and make sure I get the right skills.
Well, this is such a great opportunity for me to shamelessly plug Take an Improv class. Because this is exactly what we talk about in the classes that we teach at Carolina Improv. And it's about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable and being able to quickly pivot and be in the moment and collaborate simultaneously. As well as, like you said, there's so much opportunity online for learning. A quick side question for our business. Do you have any perspective on how we could take that improv piece that we do so well live with people, because we are trying to teach them human interaction? Do you have any thoughts on taking that to technology and taking that online and not losing what's so awesome about that training in person?
Yeah, I don't know, because it seems like the whole point is the in-person, like that's the whole benefit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can, one of the things that will probably be useful, I talk a lot in Humanity Works about gamification, simulation, virtual and augmented reality. And that's where I think that you could potentially make the biggest impact, is to have a virtual reality simulation around some of this stuff. So people are presenting as themselves essentially in a real world environment, but it's their avatars that are interacting, versus, because a lot of our work is going to be done via avatar. It won't always be in person, but yet you still do need to have those interpersonal skills. Just because your avatar is interacting doesn't mean that your avatar isn't, at the end of the day, interacting with another human being. So it will be different, but teaching people how to engage in that environment, I think, is a potential opportunity for you all. And also, of course, it makes sense from a business perspective, because that way you can reach more people in more places versus, people who are just in your immediate geographic area.
Well, thanks for that. And one thing that we are doing is we're rolling out a certification program where we're training people throughout the country so that they can continue to do that instructor-led training, because it gets a little bit lost online. We haven't quite tackled the gamification of it, but like you've said earlier, see the writing on the wall and start working towards it. So that's my aha from this podcast. Well, it's the time goes by fast and we have to wrap up. But before we do, what is one thing that you would like to share with our listeners about anything or about your book, that why should they get this book? How will it help leaders?
Yeah, so the book is called Humanity Works, Merging Technologies and People for the Workforce of the Future. And the one thing that I want to emphasize to people is the need to be proactive, and the fact that a lot of the things that we talk about in the book, there's very easy action plans at the end of each chapter. And what we're trying to do is that, there are things that are small tweaks that you can make to your business that you can do tomorrow to help yourself be better prepared. The idea behind Humanity Works is not to encourage you to overhaul your entire operation so that you are future-proofed. What we are suggesting is that we see the changes coming. There are little things you can do that are as simple as, you've got a bunch of contract workers and you've got one manager using one system to bring them in. You've got another manager using a different system. Why not systematize that so that everybody is more productive? The contract workers know what they're doing. They have the business's mission, vision, and values, and they're marching forward with the same orders as the rest of the organization. That's not actually that hard of a thing to do. And why not start having customized career conversations with your team? Like, okay, well, here are some different skills that you feel you need to acquire. Let's customize a training program. It can be online, in person, a mixture of both, to make sure that you're moving where you need to be moving and not just assuming that someone is going to stay in a sales role, for example, for the rest of their career. So that's the idea behind the book. It's just, these are small things that if you start doing them now, you can be in a much better position for when things become really dire in a couple of years. And one of the things about my books is that I try to get to people before things become dire.
Yeah.
Where, oh God, we have to do something tomorrow or our business is going under. And I don't want people to get to that point. So especially if you're an aspiring leader, current leaders should obviously be doing this stuff, but aspiring leaders who see leadership in their future in the next 5 to 10 years need to come in with these skills. They need to come in doing things differently. And so I think the book will be especially helpful for them.
That's great. And I think that's really important. It's kind of like you don't want to have to go to a doctor. So if you could be preventative, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot too. We've seen this a lot where we're working with clients who come to us after things are really severely broken and a Band-Aid's just not going to be enough. So I think what you're offering is great opportunities for leaders to prevent bigger problems down the road.
I hope so. That's my goal.
Well, if people want to, and we're going to include the link for your book in our show notes so that people can just click on it and go buy a book. But if people want to connect with you or get a hold of you or find you, what are some best ways to do that?
Well, the book website is called humanityworksbook.com. And if you go there, you can actually not only just purchase the book if you want, but there are a lot of bonuses that we're giving organizations. I do a lot of speaking around the world about these issues and also some implementation ideas. But we're offering for the next year a very special arrangement where if you just buy books, you can get a speaking engagement for free. So companies might want to take advantage of that. It's only going to be a year long and then we'll be done with that. So feel free to check that out. Ask me if you have any questions. I am available at any time via any of the social networks. My email is arl@alexandralevit.com. Would love to hear people's feedback on the book. If there are ideas or things that you would like to see more on, I'm sure this is going to be updated in a couple years because of all the content that changes. So I would love to hear what all the listeners think, and would love to help in any way I can in helping you become more prepared and excited about the future of work.
And also on that website are all of her social media buttons that you can click on to connect with Alexandra that way too, as well through the website. So thank you, Alexandra, so much for being on the Pivotal Leader today. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun, and I look forward to connecting with everyone.
Well, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Pivotal Leader. Once again, thanks to Alexandra for her time today to talk about the future of work. And thank you to our listeners for always listening. And don't forget, if you want to maximize, you need to improvise. And now it's time for that cool voiceover guy to take us out.
You've been listening to The Pivotal Leader with Gina Trimarco, owner and founder of Pivot 10 Results and Carolina Improv Company. You can find show notes for this episode on our website at thepivotalleader.com. The Pivotal Leader is a production of Pivot 10 Results, a strategy and training company that helps businesses shift from people problems to performance results. If your company needs help pivoting to success, visit pivot10results.com or email Gina at pivot10results.com. And until next time, if you're feeling stuck in your business, it's probably time to pivot.